Hello, we're with Dr. Craig Carter again today, theologian and research professor of theology at Tyndale University in Toronto. And today we're going to talk about the recent rise in anti Semitism in the world, most of all in the United States, been so recent and kind of apathetic almost. Craig, if you could speak to that briefly about that, I would appreciate it.
Well, anti-Semitism is a long-standing thing, and I think we should define it a little bit. There are three kinds of anti-Semitism, in my opinion. There's been a lot of research on this by historians in the last 75 years, and a lot of debate and discussion about what it is, where it comes from, what causes it, how to recognize it, and all those kinds of questions. I think that stepping back and looking at the big picture, I think you can distinguish three kinds of anti Semitism. First of all, there's what I would call natural ethnic group rivalry anti Semitism. Whenever you have two groups of people living in the same space, there's often competition. And so the Greeks and the Turks, the tribes in Africa, everywhere you go around the globe. I was raised in New Brunswick. So in New Brunswick, it's the English speaking people against the Acadians. But the English speaking people are made up of Scotch, Irish, and English. If you go to Ireland, it's the Irish against the English. So it depends on the situation and the history of the local place, and it's normal. I mean, normal it's not good, it's not right, it's not nice, but it is common, put it that way, for there to be intergroup rivalry, and so you would expect to see that, and it's not exactly earth shattering. It's just the way fallen humans interact on this planet. The ethnic groups are rivals, and they develop dislike for each other, and they use slurs about each other, and they criticize each other, and so on and so forth. Jewish people get caught up in that just like everybody else. So there's what you could call normal ethnic rivalry anti-Semitism, and then secondly, there's a kind of anti-Semitism that is common because the Jewish people are 4,000 years old as a race. Abraham was the first Jew. There are very few groups of people that have maintained any kind of cultural ethnic identity over a long period of time like that. You have the Greeks, maybe the Egyptians, but the list is very short. So the
Right.
Jewish people have existed for a long time, and they have thrived for a long time in many different circumstances, under very adverse circumstances. They've been dispossessed of their homeland between 70 AD and 1948. That's a long time for a ethnic group to continue to exist without its own homeland. Um, and they've been very successful so there are more Jewish Nobel Prize winners per capita, more Jewish doctors, scientists, engineers, more Jewish holders of patents, scientific patents, than per capita than any other group. So there is a kind of a an envy of the Jewish people, especially on the part of any dispossessed or group or people who feel inadequate or like failures. In other words, there's what we could call loser anti-Semitism. It's basically a kind of resentment against successful people,
Right.
and and a desire to reach up and tear down it's the sort of human emotion that the Bolsheviks played on in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. The resentment against the upper class nobility and the people that had money, on the part of people who were at the lower end of society, just kind of is saying to them, you have a right to hate these people because they're more successful than you. And that's why you should join our revolution. So there's a lot of that. There are a lot of people who are just anti-Jewish people because they are successful and they have survived, and they resent them, and they hate them. So that's two kinds. The third kind of anti-Semitism is what I would call spiritual warfare anti-Semitism. There is a strong element of um, hating the Jewish people for introducing God and the Ten Commandments into our society. You will hear people online saying that they're against the Judeo-Christian ethos of the West. Why? Because the Jews don't deserve to be lumped in with the Christians as progenitors of our Western civilization. The Jews are evil and bad, and we want to reject them. But the truth is that Christianity emerges out of Judaism, and Christianity does not reject the Old Testament. We had that debate in the second century. The Gnostic teacher Marcion came to Rome and wanted to get rid of the Old Testament, claimed that the Old Testament God was an inferior God. The New Testament God's a God of love. The Old Testament God's a God of wrath. And he wanted to get rid of the Old Testament, and he wanted to turn Christianity into a religion that was not only post-Jewish, but anti-Jewish. And the church said, no, we're not doing that. The Old Testament is our Bible. We see ourselves as grafted onto the tree of Israel. We see ourselves as part of the same story that God has been working out all through the Old Testament, culminating in the Jewish Messiah, Jesus, who we believe in. And so the church has rejected this, but it keeps coming back. There is a almost a demonic hatred of the Jews by people who really, it's not really that they hate the Jews. Behind their hatred of the Jews is a hatred of God, the God of the Jews, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the law, the God who says, no, adultery is wrong. And there are a lot of people who will even confess that the reason that they don't believe in God and the reason that they're not Christians is because God cramps their lifestyle. To believe in God would mean they have to stop sinning, and they don't want to stop sinning.
Right.
And so they resent the idea that society as a whole supports the God who says thou shalt not do this and this and this.
Yeah.
Therefore, who is responsible for introducing that God who cramps my lifestyle? It's the
The
Jews.
Jews. Yeah.
And I think that behind that or manipulating that are spiritual forces, demonic forces, Satan himself, who appeals to people to reject God. And one of the ways he gets them to reject God without saying so in so many words is to hate the Jews. So the Jews are almost like a proxy for God. They become almost collateral damage in the sense that the war is against God, but they're in the way. And I think that spiritually, I would say that some instances of anti-Semitism in the world belong to that first level, that's just normal inter-ethnic group rivalry. There are some people who say things that are anti-Semitic, and they're wrong and they're bad, but they're really not that serious. It's not that big a deal. It's just the same way the Irish talk about the English and the English talk about the Irish, and one tribe in Africa talks about the other. It doesn't necessarily lead to rape and murder and genocide. It's just an intergroup rivalry. So there's some of that. And there's also some anti-Jewish sentiment on the part of people who are just basically compensating for their own inadequacies and their own failures in life. And they hate the successful. They hate the rich. They hate those who seem to have it together. They hate those who survive. So there's that. But I think that behind those manifestations, there is, if those two were all that existed, it wouldn't be that dangerous for the Jews. Um, but there is another level to it that is spiritual and theological, and it's very big and very serious. Most people don't know that the Arabs in the Muslim Brotherhood, that is after the fall of the Caliphate in World War I, the Ottoman Empire ended. There's no more Islamic Caliphate. A group developed in the 20s and 30s called the Muslim Brotherhood. They developed in Egypt. They spread all over the place. Their ideology is to restore the caliphate and for Islam to conquer the world. And out of this ideology comes Al Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and a whole list of other groups. And basically, they absorbed Nazi propaganda during the 1930s, and they reconceived of their own Islamic religion and reread the Quranic texts in such a way as to make the Jews the chief villain of history. And so, whereas the Nazis had a race-based anti-Semitism, the Arabs, who were influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood, developed a religious-based anti-Semitism. And this religious-based anti-Semitism focuses on one set of Quranic texts as opposed to another, namely the later texts that after the Jews had rejected Muhammad, he said some uh, very evil and bad things about them, and they focus on those, and they think that Israel is the enemy. Now, but actually, Israel is just the closest enemy. The nation of Israel is right in the middle of uh, the Middle Eastern area that has been conquered by Arab Muslim conquerors over the centuries.
Mhm.
And it's the last little bit of non
Yeah,
Muslim
yeah,
controlled territory in that whole region. So they're focused on trying to destroy Israel. But the same war, the same ideological problem that they have with Israel, they have with the West, they have with Christians. And Islam has been trying to conquer the West since the seventh, eighth century, and they are they are as much opposed to Christians as they are to Jews. It's a religious motivation. It's a fanatical, religious, political, violent um, attitude that they take toward the Jews, and this goes way beyond normal interethnic group rivalry or loser resentment. This is something that drives and motivates entire societies, as you see in the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are teetering on the brink of collapse. They have murdered 30,000 of their own people to
yeah,
hold on to power. And why? They are determined to destroy Israel no matter what happens to them. They are apocalyptic, visionary, religious fanatics. And they're not doing what is rational in terms of realistic geopolitical strategy. They're not ensuring the survival of their government. They are risking utter destruction because they're driven by this religious zeal to destroy the Jews, and it's going to destroy them. What I'm saying is that's dangerous. That is an ideology that affects everybody in the world. We're all endangered by that ideology, and we have to understand that anti-Semitism is not just something that is dangerous for Jews. It is dangerous for the world because today it may be the Jews, but if they destroyed Israel, if God forbid the nation of Israel was wiped off the map and all the Jews were subjected to a second Holocaust, and so that the 7 million Jews in Israel were destroyed, if you think for one moment that Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Iran would stop at that and say, now the job is finished, it's all
right.
over, we can just live peacefully now
Yeah,
forever. That is absolutely naive. That is an ahistorical understanding. That is ignoring 14 centuries of Islamic history.
yeah,
That would not happen. The war would then be, the frontier would then be the the Western Mediterranean. It would be Greece. It would be Italy. It would be Spain. It would be conquering Western Europe, and ultimately North America. So that's what anti-Semitism is, and so we can't. Uh, Anti-Semitism should be a concern to everybody, and particularly it should be a concern to people in the West who understand the true nature of Islam and its history and its desire to conquer the world, especially in certain forms, such as the one that the Shiite form that rules Iran at the moment. That's especially bad. But the Sunnis are also bad. I mean,
mm,
Qatar, um, Turkey, many of these nations are driven by leaders who and ruling elites that are extremely imbued with an anti-Israel. It's not just anti-Israel, anti-West. It is a desire to see the Islamic Empire spread over the entire earth, and there will never be peace until everyone is conquered by Islam in that ideology. So it's something that affects us all.